My name is Nathaniel Elo, and I'm a fifth-year transfer student, double majoring in psychological and brain science and sociology at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I'm also joined today by Vanessa Woods and Charlene Macharia. Unfortunately, we do not have Malaphone and Matthew here, but we're glad that they were able to help us with this presentation and in preparation for this project. So today we will be discussing designing a mixed method transfer student climate study using an asset-based framework. So once again, we thank you all for congregating here today, but before we can continue, we'd like to take this time to acknowledge the land on which we gather. The University of California campus, represented by the speakers, exists on this unceded land of Indigenous people. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional Chumash lands. We also acknowledge that the University of California was founded upon exclusion and erasure of many Indigenous people, including those on whose land our institutions are located. So once again, we say welcome. Our presentation team welcomes you and your contribution to this important conversation. We are a team of faculty, Vanessa Woods, staff, Malaphone, graduate student, Charlene, and undergrad, myself, and Matthew, from the Office of Undergraduate Education and Departments of Psychological and Brain Science and Education, who came here today to investigate important questions about transfer student experiences. So as we go through this presentation, it is our goal to have this presentation be as interactive as possible. So please, type into the chat with questions or comments that you have as soon as you have them or think of them, and we will be stopping throughout this presentation to check the chat and answer any questions that you may have. So without further ado, I lead it to Vanessa to continue with the presentation.
Thank you, Nathaniel. So welcome everyone. I just wanted to quickly check in about our learning outcomes, and then we're gonna talk a little bit about who's here. So what we're hoping for this presentation is that we give some time to examine our multidisciplinary frameworks and our mixed methods approach to characterizing climate for transfer students at our university. We're hoping to have engagement and conversation around two really important things. One of them is the support for marginalized students when we think about climate and transfer students. And the second is to really consider the complexity of the intersecting identities and the assets that transfer students bring to our universities. We want to leverage this opportunity to help everyone figure out how a climate survey might fit at your institution. And we're hoping that you get to observe the strengths of developing a collaborative research team that centers student voices. So before we get started, we did want to find out who's here. So welcome, but we were hoping you could type into the chat and let us know your name, your pronouns, the institution that you represent. And then if you have anything about your institution, any characteristics that you feel you want to share, feel free to put those in, and of course, as many as you want. And then if you have any initial questions, we'd love to hear them. It's okay if you don't, but if you do, we'd love to hear your initial questions too, because we can kind of keep those in mind as we move through this presentation. So we're going to take a moment, and I'm going to let you type into the chat. Okay, so I see, well, welcome Megan. So we have Central Washington University, Regional Comprehensive University, a rural area, about 10,000 students, emerging HSI. It's exciting. Catherine, University of South Carolina, fantastic. Shannon, University of Maryland, public four-year university just outside of DC. And Shannon, thank you for hosting. Robert, we have University of Florida, very large public institution. We got that vibe going on at UCSB as well. Miki Brooks, University of Colorado Boulder, nice, large public institution, PWI, yep. We had Malaphone and I actually just had a really interesting discussion about how UCSB might technically not be a PWI, but it probably still very much feels like a PWI, but that's a whole nother question. Christine Metzo, St. Cloud State University. So public regional comprehension, statewide system. That's always an interesting added element, right? When you're in these statewide systems, about half of your students are transfers. That's amazing. Phil Larson from University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, large public institution. Tom Greitz, I hope I said that correctly. Stockton University. Deanna Milligan from Clemson University. Sorry, the spacing. And then Alberto Vasquez, Washington State University, public campus, transfer only. Wow, that must be really interesting. And then Indiana, large public University from Kelly Wagner. Thank you so much. It's so great to see everyone, and I definitely see some diversity, but I also see that we are representing a fair amount of larger universities. So hopefully some of our large university stuff is helpful for people, because I know that's always an interesting dynamic, has good and bad things associated with it. And so at this point, I would love to hand the presentation off to Charlene, who's going to talk a little bit about the why we decided to do this.
Thank you, Vanessa. Yeah, once again, my name is Charlene, she, her pronouns, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here. It's nice to see people from all over. So to jump right in, so why did we do this transfer student climate survey? The main reasons are we wanted to capture the diverse experiences of transfers. Even though transfer students are already grouped under the label of transfers, there's a lot of diversity within the transfer community. And we wanted to lift up their voices to the rest of the campus community. We also wanted to combat the deficit framing narrative that's towards transfer students, not only just to shed light on the challenges, but we want to also shed light on their strengths and their resilience on campus. Okay. So we used a multidisciplinary framework towards our approach in the survey and the focus groups. So we use the community cultural wealth framework by Yoso, looking at transfer students as already coming into campus with their own cultural capital. They already have a wealth of experiences and knowledge from the past institution, as well as all of the other identities that they come with, cultural identities, ethnic, and experiences that they come with. And also the counter spaces framework from Solzarno. And that's looking at how transfer students, the campus and transfer students both create safe spaces for themselves. So the campus may have already some support systems for transfer students as they come in, and also transfer students as themselves can create those spaces for support for themselves as well. And then looking at the self-determination theory by Ryan and Deci. And that's a psychological theory that looks at how humans have this, the positive tendency towards growth, and looking at the autonomy, competence, and also the relatedness that transfer students use to navigate their way through campus. Okay, so we are very committed to mixed methods. From the start, we wanted to use mixed methods because, one, the survey captures a large number of transfer students. We sent that out and we got a lot of responses, and you can capture a lot of different experiences while on campus. And then the qualitative part, we did focus groups and we got more depth. So the survey got a lot of people, and then the focus groups, we got deeper into their own individual experiences. And it was great to have both qualitative and quantitative, and in uplifting the diverse experiences and on campus, and just their own thoughts of how their experiences have been so far. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna hand it back to Vanessa.
Thank you, Charlene. So we thought this would be a good point to stop and just have a discussion. And you are welcome to unmute if you're comfortable and speak, or if it's easier or you're more comfortable to use the chat, please use the chat and I will read it out. But our question is, in your experiences on your campus, have you seen some of these frameworks or the ideas of transfer students having many intersecting identities that really do impact the nature of support? So we're just curious sort of what y'all think of the frameworks part, and to talk a little bit about transfer students intersecting identities, and maybe those are somewhat particular to your campus, right? Depending on different aspects of the demographics of your campus. So if you could, again, unmute or type into the chat, let's talk. Okay, so Catherine, through my research, I found that some transfers don't necessarily identify as transfers and want more intentional support around the other identities they hold, like being a veteran, being a parent. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I'm wondering if Charlene or Nathaniel have any thoughts on that, because we definitely I'm curious what you all, so Charlene and Nathaniel ran the focus group, so I will turn to them for all things focus group. And I'm wondering if you noticed anything with that in the focus group.
Yeah, actually, could we go back one slide? I realized we actually skipped over that.
That's okay.
Yeah, so also going into the question, we wanted to honor the transfer students' intersecting identities. And that's one thing we were trying to gauge through the survey, because some people, let me get to the question again. It was Catherine who said, yeah, many transfer students didn't really identify as transfers as their main identity. And that's what we were trying to gauge through the survey. So some of them actually were more, identified with being students, student parents, others with veterans, others with being non-traditional, because some were older than most of their age was, the huge age difference between majority of the undergraduate students at UCSB. So that was their main identity, that they were coming in as, oh, I'm just much older than everyone here. So we wanted to capture that in the survey, not just assume that, oh, that's their main identity. And also we wanted to acknowledge that many transfer student identities are also marginalized within higher education. So one of the ones that came up a lot was the whole age gap that some transfer students came with, and how they felt they were not being catered towards whether it's their age or ethnic groups. So they're coming in with all of these different experiences, as well as marginalized identities and needs that can't just be generalized into one transfer student experience. So yeah, I just wanted to go back and mention that.
And then I see we have two other comments, kind of reinforcing what Catherine and what Charlene you just said. So saying focus groups, Christine shared focus groups that they ran on their campus that got the same sort of disidentification with the transfer identity. And then Megan added, I see that too, their other identities are more salient to them. Yeah, no, it's lunchtime here. We're on the West Coast too. Don't feel bad. You can eat all you want. I'm constantly eating on camera, so don't worry. Yeah, so it's an interesting thing though, when we think about like as a so I bring, the psychological and brain sciences aspect to this. I'm the psychologist in this mess. And it's interesting to me because I feel like that identity piece is really fascinating, and what of those identities they're highlighting in this space, I think is a really interesting question. Let's see, any of the high school AA students admitted as transfers right out of high school, starting their experience, identify as freshmen? Yeah, that would be an interesting thing to look at, Robert. Like, is there something about the time in school that matters? And one of the things we did ask in the survey that I'm actually really curious about was how many, we're on a quarter system at UCSB. So we asked, how many quarters have you been here? And I do think it will be interesting to look at if there's patterns based on time, at the university. So yeah, for sure. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to keep going, but again, as you have questions or if you think of something, just pop it into the chat, because we have a couple of these checkpoints set up so that we can make sure and we capture everything. So if you think of something, put it right in and we'll get to it. So that we thought we would just share a little bit of our experience of how we did this, because it was definitely a process and it felt really big when we first decided to try to do this. It's kind of overwhelming. And so we started by doing a lot of homework. And so we had a lot of conversations, and I would say, and I think this might be useful in this large university context, one of the most useful conversations we had was, well, multiple conversations we had was with our institutional research. And on our campus, that's who controls all the student data, basically. And it was really, really helpful to talk to them. We have a UC-wide student survey that goes out every 2 years. And so we talked to the person who actually runs that climate, the UC climate survey. And they had so much good information about like the kind of survey part of it, but they also had a ton of really good logistic information about like how to do it to get good responses and things like that. So they were invaluable. Those conversations that we had with institutional research were huge. And then they helped us, of course, with disseminating our survey and figuring things out about it. So I would say that partnership was very key. And I would say it's definitely worth figuring out on your campus who controls your student data and becoming friends with them. The other thing on our campus that was really helpful, we had a faculty person in education who had recently done a climate survey. It was focused on health and wellness and substance abuse. So it was, a different, obviously, climate topic than we were looking at. But it was really helpful to talk to them, especially about the general stuff, because within wellness, of course, there were questions about like racism and microaggressions and things like that were really helpful and helped us figure out how we might want to approach some of those aspects of our climate survey. So, and how we found out about that, because again, we're a big campus, and so I wouldn't necessarily know that, but our institutional research person knew that this person had done this climate survey because they obviously had helped them with some of the data. And so they referred us to them. We got their report, we got their, they were great. They shared everything. And so that was actually really, really valuable. The other thing is it was very important, as we mentioned, to center student voices. And so we talked to a lot of former and current transfer students about how would you like to be asked about climate? What are things that come up when you think of the word climate? Just so we could get kind of a real version, because sometimes as like the faculty or Malaphone staff, we're so removed in some ways, it's hard to know quite where to go. And so it's really helpful to really center transfer student voices in all of this. The other thing we talked to is there's a fair amount of people on our campus, a lot of grad students doing research on student success related to transfers and related topics. So we made sure we tried to find, again, those grad students who were doing some research, we could get a sense of what they were doing and what, again, kind of frameworks they used and what are experiences they were hearing kind of over and over again. As we mentioned, just to say, just to really reiterate, it was very important to us to be committed to our mixed methods approach, because our main goal was to really lift up our diverse voices of transfer students and to try to represent the diversity of transfer experiences. And we also it's really important to us in the setup and in the reporting that we're working on now, that we really frame this in an asset-based way and that we really try to capture a holistic experience. And so all the questions, we basically made sure we were allowing for both reporting of positive and negative experiences, because we really feel this holistic part is important. I don't think I would say I don't think any transfer student has a solely positive or solely negative experience, right? And so we really wanted to try to capture what that was looking like in both directions. And that was interesting, actually. One of the things we noticed when we were looking through a lot of climate surveys, and this could be because why would you do one? And often you do one because you're like, oh, there's a problem, but they're very negatively framed. And so we did have to work a little bit to try to get the frame where you had both to kind of share and to make it as neutral as possible in some spaces, so that people could share whatever they needed to. But that was one of the interesting things we noticed. So again, it's really important to us to do asset-based reporting to our campus, and we're really working hard to shift that institutional narrative away from this deficit-based model. What we're focusing on and what we're framing it is like, what are the experiences we have captured and how we can provide support aimed at these experiences that we've heard about related to student success. We're trying to get away from that, like, what's the problem? How do we fix it? Because it's a little bit too simplistic and it's a deficit-based model. And we're really working hard to shift away from that. But as you know, maybe it's different on your campus, but on our campus, it's a little bit rough to people have been ingrained to think about it as a problem. So we wanted to now stop again and ask for your thoughts. So now that you've heard some of the ideas, what questions do you have? Or if you don't have specific questions yet, the question is, how do you see this impacting a climate survey you might design? Because we're assuming you're here because you're thinking about maybe doing one, right? So do you have questions for us, or does any of this kind of spark anything that you want to talk about? And again, feel free to unmute or type into the chat, whatever is more comfortable.
Well, I'll ask a question now that I'm done with my sandwich. I'm curious about the decision, like the decision to pursue, well, actually even the definition of what do we mean by climate survey, right? Like I did a survey of transfer students when we opened the transfer center, because I specifically wanted to know some demographic characteristics and things like that, but and to be able to link that to some of the other questions I was asking, which were about the kinds of programming and activities they would like to see. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just curious about like that was one kind of survey. Tell me more about what you mean by a climate survey and how they've been used, because this isn't my area.
That's a great question. That is possibly why it felt so overwhelming when we first decided to do this, because it's like, well, climate, what do we mean? And so we were talking about kind of how one of the broad ways we thought about climate that we thought would be interesting is that idea of, are you sort of proud to be a transfer student here, or is this something you're kind of not telling people about, right? So what is the campus perception of transfers, and is that different in different spaces, right? We kind of looked into those kind of things. So we thought about it like big picture transfer identity and how that's viewed from the campus to the transfers and from the transfers to the campus, right? Like in both directions. And then, and we'll get to this in the next step where it's more specific. So I think we can maybe come back to some of this too, but really thinking about, do you feel as a student, and in this case as a transfer student, do you feel like there's spaces? Like we have another project that was going on separately, but that was related to the impact of physical space, because there's a lot of interesting things obviously since COVID. And so we wanted to we have some questions about, like, do you have spaces where you feel like you are at home? Do you have spaces where you feel supported and safe? We kind of wanted to look at the physical space part of it. And then we really thought about transition, because that's kind of one of the themes when we talk to transfer students and we talk to graduate students doing research with transfer students. There's a lot of talk of transition and like how does that happen? How long does it take? When do you feel comfortable? Obviously, there's different transition trajectories. So we kind of split those up into like academic, social, housing, financial, to kind of think about the different ways you might transition and start to feel like this is your place. And then also we want to talk a lot about networking and resources. And with that, I have a frame of like high impact practices. So to look at a lot of transfers, what we heard was nervousness about time, like a lot of timeline nervousness, right? And so one of the things that you could think might be associated with that is less of a chance to do some high impact kind of practices, right? So we really wanted to see if that was true. I mean, that was our thought, but that may or may not be true. So we wanted to look at impact on networking, impact on high impact practice, involvement, and things like that. So we kind of we did try to hit a lot of things, if that makes sense. We were, Malaphone and I, and Charlene and Nathaniel and Matthew, we like to think big. And so we were like, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it well and do it kind of big. So our biggest challenge was then to make it as succinct as possible, but still capture what we want. That was by far, we spent, I mean, gosh, how many months, y'all, cutting it? Look at Nathaniel. Do you remember that? Oh my gosh. We sort of put everything in and then we're like, okay, what can we take out? What is redundant, all that. So it was a process, but yeah, that's a fantastic question. Other questions or thoughts? Thoughts are fine too. Things you've noticed. Now, perhaps you might have more questions when we go through like what, kind of, we're calling it the nitty-gritty of the survey. So I'm actually going to hand it off to Nathaniel to start talking about the survey in detail, and then we'll have another chance for questions and comments after. So Nathaniel, take it away.
Yes, most definitely. Thank you so much. So yes, we're going to be discussing the nitty-gritty of the survey. So in understanding the key aspects or the important aspects of the survey, we decided to break it down into 4 main sections. 1 being to understanding the context for their transfer student college experience and their transfer student identity. 2 being acknowledging the general climate for transfer students. 3 being seeing how was the student's experience transitioning to UCSB. And 4, what were their experience with networking, connections, and resources with on and off campus resources. So as we go on to the next slide, we'll continue to break down each section as well. So for the transfer student context and transfer student identity, we measured it by asking and understanding, various things such as their interdependence, their interdependent and independent motive for college, academic self-efficacy, self-regulated learning, what is their ability to learn and how is that being affected as well, imposter phenomenon, cultural incongruence, and brief resilience scale. And so when transitioning on to learning about the transgender identity, we measured it by using surveys and open-ended questions as well. And for the general climate for transfers, we wanted to understand the level of respect and reputation of transfer students on the campus and in their respective majors as well. The level of welcoming, support, and belonging that aids a student in finding a place that helps them feel like home, and microaggressions and microaffirmations that may affect them within the institution. Moving forward to analyzing their experiences transitioning to UCSB, we looked at their academic, social housing, and financial transition, advising and adjustments, access and involvement in opportunities and high impacted practices, along with pressure being the transfer students. And a few examples as mentioned on the slide of pressures, which are included but not limited to, obligations outside of academics, their graduation timeline, how long it will take for them to graduate when transferring to the institution of their choice, and financial pressures as well, and etc. Lastly, focusing on their experience with networking, connections, and resources, we measure that by asking about their ability to network and find connections. Given that they're new student transitioning onto a new institution, how are they able to find help that would aid them within their academia or anything that they would like to pursue as within their choice? Their usage of support places or support spaces on campus as well, followed by the utilization of campus services and resources as well. So to understand the practical details of the focus group questions, Charlene will be explaining that portion.
Thank you, Nathaniel. And yeah, as for the focus group questions, they were 10 main questions, and then some of them are broken up in parts, which covered their motivations for being in college. We asked them, yeah, why are you even here? And that was really interesting to get their responses. Comparing the experiences from the previous institution, whether classroom experiences on campus and outside campus, and then looking at the factors that influence their transition, as Nathaniel said, academically, socially, on all those different levels, financially as well. And then looking at their involvement in high impact practices within the campus, like whether they know about and have access to different opportunities and resources and spaces that can support them on campus. Also, we wanted to explore the transfer student identity, as I mentioned earlier, to see whether that's their being a transfer student, if that's their salient identity or what they think about themselves as transfer students, or even what is their main identity. And then also looking at what their reputation is on campus. So asking them questions like, what do you think the reputation is on campus from the perspective of professors, other students, amongst transfer students. So we're exploring that. And then we just wanted to give them a voice as well, to just share and voice their opinions and their experiences. So we asked them open-ended questions like, yeah, how do you feel as a transfer student? What would you want your professors to know about you as a transfer student or transfer students in general? And what do you want their administration to know as well? And we actually got a lot of very interesting responses, not interesting in a bad way, but in a good way. Like we got a lot of suggestions, a lot of actually practical recommendations that based on their personal experiences, how they think the campus, whether it's administration or the professors in the classroom, can create a better, safer space and acknowledge the strengths of transfer students, as well as create more support for them. So we got a lot of information from those questions. And also in general, just to talk about the focus group process, Nathaniel and I were conducting most of them, and also Malaphone, and it was really fun. Most of the groups were about four. It was four. The maximum was four students per group, and we had many broken up. And yeah, it was really cool because it was all randomly assigned based on the people who responded that they wanted to participate. And it ended up just being a cool discussion where they were feeding off of each other, and the experiences were like building each other, or some people were like, oh, this was my experience. And then some other person would be like, oh, I faced that as well. And so we got a lot of, it was good to have it in that setting of like a community kind of discussion. Yeah, it was really diverse and interesting, and because some people had transferred in, maybe it was a fourth year as a transfer student, some people had just transferred in, and then some people had just transferred in within the pandemic. So it was also interesting to capture those experiences of being a transfer student at UCSB while everything is virtual learning. So it was really fun conducting it. I had fun. It was really interesting to hear the stories, and also within a smaller focus group setting. This was all on Zoom as well. People were able to really open up. Most people were really vulnerable with their experiences, talking about challenges they faced with mental health, also talking about experiences they had, whether positive or negative, with professors, also with different challenges, like with disabilities, feeling like they were not given the right accommodations in classrooms. So we were able to get a lot of stories, and from the stories we're still in the process of coding and analyzing and turning those into like, okay, how can we better serve transfer students and also amplify their voice on campus? So yeah, it was really fun doing the focus groups. And I think that was it for that. And I'll just pass it on to Vanessa.
Well, also too, Nathaniel, did you want to add anything about your experience with the focus groups before we move on?
I mean, most of within the focus groups, I kind of felt not necessarily victim, but I kind of correlated with a lot of things that they were talking about. Even with my experience being a transfer student as well, I think the biggest concern that I had for myself when transferring to this new institution was one, finding the support place, and that was what a lot of students had vocalized when we were doing these focus group questions. It's where can we go on campus that makes us feel like, okay, we're okay or safe feeling as a transfer student. Because transitioning from, in my case, in my situation, going from a community college to a now 4-year institution, I know one thing that I've expressed to multiple people, and along with like my own cohorts or like other transfer students as well, is, developing a sense of belonging at this institution was hard for me personally, because it's different transitioning from a little CC and now going to like this bigger institution. And so given that many students felt like that, that's why this project was conducted. So that way we could have vocalized the voices of those that are transfer students and understand like the struggles that they may be going through, but along with that, trying to find a solution to these problems that many of them tend to be facing as well.
Thank you, Nathaniel. So our current progress, we are currently analyzing a lot of data. I just want to give a huge shout out to Charlene and Nathaniel, because I have no qualitative chops in my life, and they are doing so many amazing things with the qualitative data, and I'm sort of in charge of the quantitative survey data. So we're a good team in that way. And I just want to acknowledge that they do things that I can't do, which is fantastic. And so, yeah, we're hoping that we'll have results for you at next year's NIST conference is our goal. But we thought it would be good. I'm going to actually do the thank you slide, and then we'll do discussion just so that we can just talk all the rest of the time. Would be happy to me. So before we have our discussion, I just want to acknowledge so many people that made this possible. So we have obviously our amazing transfer students who participated in the survey, and some of those then participated in focus groups. Our Transfer Student Center was integral and amazing at coordinating our survey dissemination. Our Office of Undergraduate Research provided administrative support. Our absolutely fantastic institutional research data team helped us with data collection. And then our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office supported the survey and the focus group compensation, as well as provided financial support for our graduate and undergraduate researchers. So we had a great team aspect to the whole thing, which was helpful. So what I wanted to do is just open it up. So what questions do you have? What do you want to know? We're happy to talk about small details, big picture, whatever you want to talk about. We want this to be useful for you. So unmute or type into the chat, whatever you like.
Well, I'll go again. It's so important, I think, when leading focus groups to have students do it. I think there's all kinds of research that shows that students need to lead focus groups with other students. And so I'm curious, if I missed it, I apologize, but how did you find these 4 wonderful people, and how did that project start for them?
Thank you, Megan. What do you mean, the 4 people? I'm sorry.
The students that are working on this project. I
Oh,
thought,
oh
is
yeah.
it 3?
Okay.
Oh, for the
Sorry,
recruit.
yeah.
Oh, so Malaphone and I. Okay, so Nathaniel is amazing. So okay, let's start over. Malaphone and I have worked together for a very long time. Malaphone is the director of academic success initiatives on campus, so in charge of the transfer center and the we have a center for first generation students. And Malaphone and I have had a partnership for about 5 years. So one of the things is my lab in psych and brain sciences studies just equity and student success in higher education. And so I tend to have at least one research assistant in my lab that's dedicated to doing some of the research that Malaphone and I are doing on transfers. And so Nathaniel got recruited because Nathaniel is amazing, but Nathaniel is also a transfer mentor. We have a program in psychological and brain sciences, a near peer mentoring program that I run. And so Nathaniel was a fantastic mentor. So I recruited Nathaniel. And then Nathaniel kind of helped recruit Matthew, but Matthew was another near peer mentor in the program. And then Malaphone and I, when we got the grant from the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, once we knew we had money to pay a grad student, that was like one of our big goals. We put a call out to we wanted someone with qualitative experience because it's not my thing. And we knew Malaphone, she's on maternity leave right now. So we knew she was not going to be able to do as much. And so we needed, and she's the qualitative person. So we were like, we need someone who can do qualitative. So we sent it out to our Department of Education because on campus, that's the grad students there tend to be very strongly trained in qualitative skills. And that is how we have wonderful Charlene with us. So we recruited Charlene from Department of Ed. We just send out some emails, to the listservs for the grad students in the department and have them send us like a paragraph of why they were interested and why it was important to them. So yeah, it was really important to Malaphone and I. We do, and I'll just be totally transparent, we definitely try to recruit scholars of color on our campus. We are a campus that does not represent Black students very well. We have 4%. We run about 4% of Black students at UCSB. So that was important to us as well. It obviously wasn't the only reason we picked things, but it was definitely something we were intentional about in recruitment. So yeah, that's a great question. And then did you want to know about how they picked the actual people in the focus groups as well? Or what were you thinking? Okay, you were thinking our amazing team. Yeah, Malaphone is one of those people because she is, running in she has her fingers obviously in the transfer center and the first gen center, and she's an amazing natural mentor. So that's the other way we often get a lot of our research assistants is she'll be talking to a student, and just kind of make a connection. And, that's, so yeah, I would say a lot of it is networking with students.
Hi, this is Robert from the University of Florida. We're a large 4-year public university, and we don't have a transfer center. So all transfers are handled by each of the individual colleges. So I am trying to work with my team to at least try and get a climate survey, at least about how they feel about the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, but we'll be remiss, if we don't ask questions about their overall transfer experience, financial aid, the orientation program, Office of Admissions, and us at the same time. So I think we'll have a mixed bag of university type of prompts in addition to our college specific prompts as well. So if anything, maybe this might be the start of something we can give to our dean that can pass it to the provost and maybe do something at the university level. But we don't have a university transfer center. And the transfer experiences are different for each college.
How many colleges do you have, Robert?
I think we have 8 undergraduate colleges. College of Engineering, the College of Business that has their own individual schools, College of the Arts and Sciences, Agriculture and Life Science. I'm not going to give you all of them, but we have a large number of undergraduate colleges.
Yeah. So Malaphone and I met because when I've been at UCSB for 5 years. And so the year I got hired was the year they were opening the transfer center at UCSB. So ours is relatively new. I mean, it's 5 years, it's not new, but it's still relatively new. And that was, I would say, again, I wasn't here before, so I can't comment on what it was like before, but I think having this space is huge. And this other project I mentioned that's going on at UCSB that Malaphone was also in charge of, kind of talking about the importance of space. I do think it's worth trying to kick up some data to some deans, get yourself some space, because it really does, I think, make a difference. But yeah, that's really challenging. Especially because, like you said, you're going to have differential experiences by college. You're going to have, like all kinds of stuff. And then Megan, you asked survey. We're absolutely happy to share our survey instrument. I'm going to put my email in the chat. So go ahead and send me an email. It's a Qualtrics. I don't know if you use Qualtrics. So I could share the Qualtrics file, or I could download it as a PDF so you could just see it. It's up to you. Whatever's easier for you. We incentivize, that's a great question. We did not have an amazing response rate, but it's really hard, as you all know, to get people to respond. What we ended up doing that helped is we have a learning management system, and we got it put on the banner of the learning management system. So that took a little bit of doing on Malaphone's part, but she bugged enough people through Office of Undergraduate Education to get that to happen. And so I think that was helpful. And then it went out through the Transfer Student Center, and the Transfer Student Center was our best response rate. They would send an email blast, and I would get 50 more participants, So I definitely, we did incentivize it. We didn't incentivize it a lot. Our IRB doesn't like us to over incentivize surveys. And we didn't have a ton of money, obviously. So we did, what do we do? I think 10 $25 gift cards to Amazon. And then for the focus groups, we did want to make sure that we were paying people for their time, because that was obviously going to be, a more sharing of a personal experience, and also definitely time. And like Charlene said, people were pretty vulnerable. So that one, I think, Charlene, we did $10, correct?
Yeah, it was $10.
Yeah. So they had $10, and each one was about a little over an hour to a little over. So yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, we didn't, as far as did we capture all the transfers on campus? Absolutely not. But I don't know. I've yet to find someone who has a really good way to capture everyone on campus. So yeah, that's always, how it is. It's always the hardest part. I do think incentivizing helps. Nathaniel was brilliant too, because when we put it on the learning management system, Nathaniel was the one who was like, hey, we should ask them if they're a transfer student before the survey, and it kicks you to the end if you're not. And that was brilliant, because there was about 300 people that clicked on it who answered no, they weren't transfer students. So highly recommend Nathaniel's question as your second question after consent, especially if you have it out, in a big public university space like that. So yeah, we did okay. Our survey did end up being long. And so we did not have, as far as who finished the entire thing, it was about close to 285, 300. That's not how many people took it. So I do think if you were to use our instrument, I would consider shortening it. We probably were a little long. The other thing I would add that I don't think we said that was interesting is we did want to be really intentional about capturing intersecting identities. And so for all of the questions, we asked people to describe what they would consider their racial, ethnic identities, their gender identities. And then we asked them a question that said, what identities are important to you besides being a transfer student? And we coded all of those. And that was really interesting too, to kind of see what people put. And the question that I thought was really fascinating is when we asked them about identities other than transfer, we ended up creating a coding category for mental well-being, because there was a lot that came up a lot, where they would say, I'm a student who suffers from anxiety, or I'm a student who suffers from depression and I need support to, with classes in particular ways or something like that. It was really interesting. I was not expecting that. I mean, we obviously got the first gen thing, as you would imagine, a fair amount. That was kind of probably the most common. And then it was interesting what other things people put. I would say the other category that we kind of added that was not, I don't know if you would, we called it family, because they would say something about like, I am an older brother, or I am the mom, or I am, the first in my family to go. And so it's really important for me to be here. So it's even more than just first gen, like a lot of mention of family in some way that was also really, really interesting to us. So that identity part was actually really cool. I would definitely recommend keeping that part. Judith, that's a great question. The students provide suggestions regarding how to build community and develop a sense of belonging. So Nathaniel and Charlene, do you have anything you want to chat about that from the focus groups?
From what I can think of right now, in the questions we asked, what would you want the administration to know or faculty to know? I remember some people said that they want the administration to just acknowledge them more, because they feel like a lot of freshmen, people who are like the freshman category, there's a lot of emphasis and welcome geared towards freshmen, but they usually feel left out, especially in their welcoming and onboarding to campus. Like what someone said, like I think an email from a chancellor or an administrator, like they were welcoming freshmen and they're welcoming particularly freshmen, but they left out the transfer students. So they really feel left out in the welcoming into campus or just being acknowledged. And they feel like even the major departments need to welcome them and maybe have at the beginning of the year or whenever, like to have a welcome ceremony also just for transfers within that department to make them feel welcome and to feel that the professors, the people in the department are approachable. So a lot of them, it was about being seen and just being welcomed and acknowledged in the same level as freshmen, because even if they're transfers, like they are new to campus as well, but they don't feel like as supported or as as compared to freshmen. So that was one of the main things that came up. They just provided just that feedback. Like they want administrators, campus people, staff to be more intentional in welcoming them. And then some of them said, like some of the safe spaces, like we asked them, like, where do you go that feels safe? Some of them mentioned, like the Transfer Student Center or the Multicultural Center. So they mentioned some places that already exist that make them feel safe. So that's what I can think of. I don't know if Nathaniel, if you have anything to add.
Actually, I don't. You pretty much have piggyback or took verbatimly what I was going to say in regards to how transfer students just want to feel acknowledged being on the institution of that they're attending as well. Definitely, multiple transfer students within the focus group have expressed, as you mentioned, Charlene, that the freshmen tend to be acknowledged more within the classroom settings as opposed to them as well. So that's one thing that a lot of them had mentioned. So thank you for bringing that up too.
Thank you. So I think we are actually at time. So we just want to say thank you to everyone for coming. We appreciate your time and your energy and your everything. And please email us if you have any further questions. I'm going to hand it back to Shannon.